On a quiet, rainy road outside Helena, Montana, a tiny German Shepherd puppy suddenly ran into traffic and stood on his back legs, paws together as if begging a stranger to stop. His fur was soaked, his eyes full of panic, and he kept looking toward the roadside grass. When Daniel Carter followed him, he discovered something heartbreaking. A mother German Shepherd lying in the mud, her head trapped in a plastic bag, barely breathing. Someone had left her there to die. But the little puppy refused to give up. And what happened next would turn a desperate moment into a miracle. If this story touches your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful animal rescue stories. Morning rain drifted across the quiet outskirts of Helena, Montana, gray clouds hanging low over empty farmland, while a narrow country road cut through fields of wet grass and silent pine trees. Daniel Carter guided his aging blue pickup slowly along the slick road, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel. At 45, Daniel had the rugged look of a man shaped by years of honest labor. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong, square jaw and deep lines around his mouth that spoke of long days working under the sun. Short brown hair, already touched with streaks of gray at the temples, clung slightly to his forehead from the humidity. A faint beard shadow darkened his cheeks. His hazel eyes carried a quiet calm, but also a trace of something heavier, memories he rarely spoke about. Daniel was a carpenter by trade, known around Helena as the kind of man who could fix almost anything made of wood. Yet people also knew him for something else: his quiet kindness. Years earlier, his younger brother had died in a construction accident, a tragedy that carved a deep silence into Daniel's life. Since then, he had become a man who noticed small things: injured birds, stray dogs, lost animals wandering the roadside. Rain tapped against the windshield in a soft rhythm as the wipers swept back and forth. The road was nearly empty, stretching like a dark ribbon through the countryside. Then, suddenly, a small shape burst from the roadside grass. Daniel's foot slammed onto the brake pedal. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt as the truck lurched to a stop just a few feet from a tiny figure standing in the center of the road. It was a puppy, a German Shepherd puppy, barely 4 months old. His oversized ears drooped slightly under the rain, and his black and tan fur was soaked so heavily it clung to his thin body. Mud coated his paws and chest. Yet despite his small size, there was something fierce in his eyes. Dark, intelligent, and filled with urgency. Daniel leaned forward, stunned. "Well, where did you come from, little guy?" The puppy didn't move away. Instead, he did something Daniel would never forget. The small dog slowly pushed himself onto his hind legs. He wobbled slightly, struggling to balance. Then he brought his 2 front paws together in front of his chest, almost like someone begging. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "You're kidding me," he murmured. The puppy let out a desperate whine, high and trembling. Then he turned his head toward the roadside ditch and ran a few steps in that direction. After only a moment, he stopped and looked back again, whining louder. It wasn't random. The dog was trying to lead him somewhere. Daniel stepped out of the truck. Cold rain immediately soaked into his flannel shirt, but he barely noticed. The puppy, who would later be known as Milo, trotted anxiously through the tall grass beside the road, glancing back every few steps to make sure the man was following. Daniel pushed aside the wet weeds. For a moment, he saw nothing but flattened grass and muddy soil. Then his eyes adjusted, and his heart dropped. Lying partially hidden in the ditch was a full-grown German Shepherd, a female. Her body was stretched awkwardly across the mud, her thick black and gold coat soaked and smeared with dirt. Several ugly cuts ran across her side, and faint rope marks circled her neck and legs, as if she had once been tied down. But the worst thing, her head was covered by a plastic bag. The thin film clung tightly to her muzzle, fogged faintly from shallow, struggling breaths. Daniel's chest tightened instantly. Oh no. No, no. The puppy ran straight to the dog and pressed his nose against her neck, whining softly. Only then did Daniel realize the truth. The puppy hadn't been begging for food. He had been begging for help. Someone had left this dog here to die. Daniel dropped to his knees in the mud, hands shaking as he reached for the plastic bag wrapped around the mother dog's head. The rain kept falling, quiet and relentless, and somewhere deep inside Daniel Carter, a terrible certainty formed. If he had arrived even a few minutes later, this dog might already be gone. Daniel Carter's fingers trembled as he tore the plastic bag away from the mother dog's head, the thin film clinging stubbornly to wet fur and mud. When it finally slipped free, the dog's muzzle was revealed, strong, elegant, but weakly trembling as a faint breath escaped. For a moment, Daniel held his own breath, leaning closer, his carpenter's hands hovering uncertainly near her neck as he searched for a pulse. Then he felt it. Weak, uneven, but there. The German Shepherd was still alive. "Easy, easy, girl," Daniel murmured, his deep voice softer than he expected. The rain continued falling around them, dampening the grass and soaking his jeans as he knelt in the ditch. The dog's chest rose slowly, barely noticeable, each breath sounding like a fragile thread clinging to life. Milo pressed close to his mother's face, whining softly, licking the dirt from her muzzle with frantic devotion. The small puppy's thin body trembled, not just from the cold, but from fear. A raw, desperate fear that even Daniel could feel. Up close, Daniel could see the marks more clearly now. Rope burns circled Luna's neck and front legs, angry red lines where something had once held her tightly in place. Bruises darkened the fur along her ribs, and there were shallow cuts across her side as if she had struggled violently to escape. Whoever had done this hadn't simply abandoned her. They had tried to make sure she wouldn't survive. Daniel's jaw tightened, a slow anger building deep in his chest. He had spent his life working with wood, shaping broken things into something strong again. But cruelty like this, cruelty against a helpless animal, was something he had never been able to understand. "Who would do this to you?" he muttered. Milo looked up at him then, dark eyes wide and pleading. The puppy gave a soft bark, almost as if answering the question. Then he nudged Daniel's hand, urging him toward Luna again. Daniel carefully placed 2 fingers against Luna's throat. The pulse was still there, but fading. If she stayed out here much longer in the cold rain, she wouldn't last. He was just beginning to lift her when a sudden roar of engine noise exploded down the road. Daniel glanced up. A large delivery truck barreled around the bend, its tires spraying water across the slick asphalt. The driver clearly hadn't expected to see a man kneeling beside the road. "Hey!" Daniel shouted instinctively. The truck horn blasted, echoing through the open farmland. The massive vehicle swerved slightly, tires screeching as it fought for grip on the wet road. For a terrifying second, Daniel thought the truck might lose control entirely. Milo barked sharply and jumped backward. The truck thundered past them only a few feet away, a violent rush of wind and water splashing across Daniel's back. Mud sprayed over his jacket as the vehicle disappeared down the road. Daniel exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. This road wasn't safe, not even for another minute. He looked down again at Luna. Her breathing had grown even weaker, her body limp against the wet ground. Milo whimpered softly and nudged his mother again. Daniel wiped rain from his face and made a decision. "All right," he said quietly. "We're getting you out of here." He slid his arms carefully beneath Luna's body. She was heavier than he expected, nearly 70 pounds even in her weakened state. But years of lifting lumber had given Daniel the strength he needed. Slowly, carefully, he lifted her from the mud. Milo trotted anxiously beside him as Daniel carried the injured dog toward the truck. Rain fell harder now, drumming against the metal roof of the pickup. Daniel opened the passenger door and gently laid Luna across the seat. Milo leapt in immediately, pressing his small body against his mother's side. Daniel climbed behind the wheel, his mind racing. There was only one place that could save her, and it was 15 minutes away. Daniel Carter slammed the truck door shut and rushed around to the driver's seat, rainwater dripping from his jacket sleeves as he climbed inside. The engine roared to life with a low growl. Behind him, Milo curled tightly against Luna's still body on the passenger seat, his small paws pressing gently against her chest, as if trying to keep her heart beating. The puppy's soaked fur clung to his thin frame, but his eyes never left his mother's face. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his large carpenter's hands steady, despite the storm of thoughts rushing through his mind. Years of working construction had taught him how to stay calm during accidents. Broken beams, falling ladders, men injured on sight. Panic never helped anyone. But this was different. This wasn't wood or nails or steel. This was a living creature fighting to breathe. "Hang on," he muttered, shifting the truck into gear. The pickup surged forward onto the wet road, tires slicing through shallow pools of rainwater. Helena's countryside blurred past the windows as Daniel pressed the accelerator harder than he normally would. The nearest veterinary clinic sat on the north side of town, about 15 minutes away on a good day. Today, with the rain and slick pavement, it might take longer. Behind him, Milo whimpered softly. Daniel glanced toward the passenger seat. Luna's body barely moved now. Her breathing had become so faint that it was almost invisible. Her head lay against the worn leather seat, water dripping slowly from her fur. Milo began licking her muzzle again, nudging her with desperate urgency. "Stay with us, girl," Daniel said quietly, his voice rough. "Just stay with us a little longer." The road curved sharply through a stretch of pine forest. Daniel slowed slightly, but the moment the truck straightened again, he pushed the speed back up. His eyes flicked constantly between the road and the passenger seat. Then something changed. Milo suddenly barked. Again. Daniel's chest tightened. Again. Daniel's chest tightened. He glanced over, and his heart dropped. Luna's chest had stopped moving. "No, no, no." Daniel kept one hand on the wheel while reaching over with the other, pressing his fingers against Luna's neck just as he had by the roadside. For a terrifying moment, he felt nothing at all. The truck drifted slightly across the center line before he corrected it. "Come on," he whispered, his voice breaking. Milo barked louder, climbing partly onto Luna's chest, whining desperately as he licked her nose. Then Daniel felt it. A faint pulse. Weak, uneven, but there. Luna's chest jerked suddenly as a shallow breath forced its way back into her lungs. Daniel exhaled in relief he hadn't realized he was holding. That's it, he murmured. "Good girl." The rain grew heavier as the truck reached the edge of Helena. Traffic lights appeared ahead through the gray curtain of water. Daniel barely slowed as he rolled through the quiet intersection, scanning the street signs until he saw the one he needed. Veterinary Clinic, Harper Animal Care. The building came into view at the end of the block, a modest brick structure with large windows glowing softly with indoor light. Daniel pulled into the parking lot and slammed the truck into park. He jumped out, rain splashing around his boots as he rushed to the passenger door. Milo barked anxiously as Daniel lifted Luna into his arms again, her body limp but still faintly warm. The clinic door burst open before he even reached it. Standing in the doorway was Dr. Emily Harper, a woman in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and chestnut hair tied quickly into a loose ponytail. She wore green surgical scrubs beneath a dark rain jacket, and thin glasses framed her focused expression. Emily Harper had built a reputation across Helena for two things: her skill with animals and her stubborn refusal to give up on any creature that still had a heartbeat. Years earlier, she had lost her own rescue dog during veterinary school, a moment that had shaped the fierce compassion she carried into every case. One look at Luna, and her expression hardened with urgency. "Bring her inside, now." The glass doors of Harper Animal Care Clinic swung open as Daniel Carter rushed inside, rainwater dripping from his jacket while Luna's limp body rested heavily in his arms. The warm light of the clinic spilled across the tiled floor, carrying the sharp smell of disinfectant and medical supplies. Dr. Emily Harper moved quickly toward him, her expression focused and calm despite the urgency in her voice. At 38, Emily had the composed confidence of someone who had faced countless emergencies. Her slender frame moved with practiced efficiency, and the small lines around her eyes hinted at years spent concentrating over operating tables. Her chestnut hair was tied back loosely, and a pair of narrow glasses rested on the bridge of her nose, slightly fogged from the sudden rush of cold air following Daniel inside. She had the kind of presence that made people instinctively trust her judgment. "Lay her here," Emily instructed, guiding Daniel toward a stainless steel examination table. Daniel carefully placed Luna down while Milo jumped onto the floor beside the table, whining softly. The puppy's paws slipped slightly on the polished tile as he circled anxiously. His eyes never left his mother. Emily immediately began examining Luna's breathing. Her fingers moved swiftly along the dog's neck, checking for pulse, while her other hand lifted the dog's eyelids to assess responsiveness. The situation was worse than she had hoped. "We're losing her," Emily said quietly. Another figure appeared from a hallway behind the clinic. Nathan Brooks, the clinic's veterinary assistant, hurried into the room pulling on blue latex gloves. Nathan was a tall man in his early 30s, with sandy blonde hair cut short on the sides, and a trimmed beard outlining his jaw. His posture carried the calm discipline of someone used to high-pressure situations. Before working at the clinic, he had served as a volunteer firefighter in Helena, a role that had taught him to act quickly without panic. Though quiet by nature, Nathan was deeply compassionate toward animals and had earned Emily's trust through years of steady work. "Oxygen line ready," Nathan said as he connected a small mask over Luna's muzzle. The machine began to hum softly as oxygen flowed into her lungs. Daniel stood back against the wall, his large hands clenched together. He felt strangely helpless, watching the scene unfold. Milo remained near the door, ears flattened against his head, letting out small cries whenever Luna's body failed to move. Emily pressed a stethoscope against Luna's chest. For several seconds, she listened without speaking. Then her expression tightened. "Heart rhythms collapsing," she said. Nathan quickly rolled a compact defibrillator cart closer to the table. The small machine beeped softly as it powered on. "Charging," Nathan announced. The room seemed to hold its breath. Emily placed the paddles gently against Luna's chest. "Clear." A sharp pulse of electricity surged through the dog's body. Luna's legs jerked slightly, then fell still again. The heart monitor emitted a long, flat tone. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Milo began barking frantically outside the doorway, scratching at the floor as if trying to reach his mother. "Again," Emily said firmly. Nathan adjusted the machine and nodded. "Clear." Another pulse surged through Luna's chest. For one endless second, nothing happened. Then, a faint blip appeared on the monitor. Another. Emily leaned closer, her eyes narrowing in concentration as the weak rhythm began to stabilize. "Wait, there it is," she whispered. The monitor beeped again, slow, uneven, but unmistakably alive. Luna's chest rose in a fragile breath. Across the room, Daniel released a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. And outside the doorway, Milo's desperate barking suddenly fell silent. Several weeks later, warm sunlight stretched across the quiet outskirts of Helena, Montana, turning the morning sky a gentle blue while the last traces of spring rain glimmered on the grass. Daniel Carter leaned back in the wooden chair on the front porch of his small cabin, a steaming mug of black coffee resting in his calloused hands. The cabin sat at the edge of a wide meadow, surrounded by pine trees that whispered softly whenever the wind passed through them. It was the kind of place Daniel had always preferred. Simple, quiet, and far from the noise of town. The porch creaked slightly under his weight as he watched the yard in front of him, his hazel eyes calmer than they had been in a long time. Across the grass, two familiar shapes darted through the sunlight. Milo, the young German Shepherd puppy who had once stood trembling in the middle of a rainy road, now ran across the yard with wild, joyful energy. At barely 5 months old, he had already grown noticeably stronger. His black and tan coat shone brightly in the sun, no longer dull and muddy as it had been that terrible morning. His oversized ears now stood tall and alert, swiveling constantly as he chased drifting leaves and imaginary enemies. Every few seconds he would sprint in wide circles, skidding slightly in the grass before bounding off again with puppyish enthusiasm. Behind him moved a calmer but equally powerful presence. Luna stepped forward slowly, her movements steady and graceful. The adult German Shepherd had healed remarkably well under Dr. Emily Harper's care. The scars along her ribs had faded, and the thick fur that once lay matted with blood had grown back clean and healthy. Her golden brown eyes carried a quiet intelligence, always watching Milo as he raced across the yard. Though she moved with dignity now, there was still a protective edge in the way she positioned herself between the puppy and the open road beyond the trees. Daniel smiled faintly as he watched them. That memory still returned to him sometimes. The rain, the slippery road, the small puppy standing on two legs as if begging the world to stop. It had been the strangest thing Daniel had ever seen, and maybe the bravest. Milo suddenly skidded to a halt near the porch steps, panting happily as his tail wagged so hard that his whole body shook. Luna approached more slowly, lowering herself onto the grass nearby while keeping watch over her energetic son. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the distant crunch of tires on gravel. A small silver car rolled slowly up Daniel's driveway. The driver stepped out and waved cheerfully. It was Dr. Emily Harper, dressed casually today in jeans and a light jacket, rather than her usual green scrubs. In the sunlight, she looked far less serious than she had in the emergency room weeks earlier. Her chestnut hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her sharp eyes softened when she saw the two dogs running freely across the yard. Though Emily had built her career around saving animals, she rarely allowed herself the time to visit former patients. But Luna's survival had meant something special to her. "Looks like someone's feeling better," she called. Milo immediately ran toward her, tail wagging wildly. Emily laughed as the puppy jumped up to greet her. "Well, I'd say that's a full recovery." Daniel stepped down from the porch, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the grass. "You were the one who made it happen," he said. Emily shook her head gently. "No," she replied, glancing down at Milo. "He did." For a moment, all three of them watched as Milo trotted proudly back to Luna's side. The mother dog lifted her head and gently nudged the puppy's ear, and Daniel Carter realized something quietly remarkable. Sometimes the smallest creature in the world could carry the biggest courage. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or shining light. Sometimes they appear quietly, on a rainy road, in the form of a small puppy brave enough to stop the world for the one he loves. Milo did not know about miracles. He did not know about fate or destiny or the mysterious ways in which God moves through ordinary moments. All he knew was that his mother needed help, and that somewhere out there a kind heart might listen. And that day, someone did. Maybe that was not an accident. Maybe it was grace. In our daily lives, we often pass by the small cries of the world, the lonely, the forgotten, the suffering. We are busy, distracted, rushing down our own roads. But sometimes God places a moment in front of us, a moment where we can choose compassion over indifference. Daniel chose to stop. Emily chose to fight for a life others had thrown away. And Milo, a tiny puppy with shaking paws, chose not to give up on the one he loved. Perhaps that is how miracles truly happen, not through magic but through kindness. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. And if you believe, like we do, that animals and humans are connected in ways that remind us of God's love, consider subscribing to the channel so we can keep sharing stories that bring light into the world. May God bless you and your family. May He guide your steps, protect your home, and fill your days with compassion for every living creature. And remember, sometimes the smallest soul can carry the greatest courage.